Probably nothing has changed human society as much as the Newtonian science did. Modern materialistic science, which is based on empirical data, experiments, and logical, rational, and mathematical analysis to objectify and quantify through testable predictions, has not only radically changed our material existence, but perhaps more importantly, our culture and the way we think about the world and especially ourselves. The beginning of modern science can be, loosely speaking, identified with Galileo Galilei's experiments with inclined planes or his observations with his primitive telescope, which disclosed to him an entirely unknown new universe. Isaac Newton and many others followed with revolutionary discoveries. However, more than anything else, it was a disruptive power of the human mind. Its rational thinking and ability for intellectual analysis applied to matter that changed everything. There is nothing within reach of our instruments, from the tiniest bits of matter to the cosmic domains, that has not been measured, quantified, dissected, reduced, and geometrized according to a bottom-up approach. Most notably, the sciences of life, such as biology and medicine, did and continue to do their utmost to reduce everything into inanimate material elementary components. By doing so, reason could unleash its full power. After over 4 centuries, the human material condition has been radically transformed by scientific discoveries and technological breakthroughs. Knowledge about the material realm, from the subatomic particle to the cosmic infinity of the universe, expanded our awareness and understanding of our place in nature. Modern materialistic science surfaced as an instinctive response to the philosophy and doctrines adopted and followed by the Christian Church during the Middle Ages. The Renaissance period sparked the restoration of the spirit of free philosophical inquiry unconditioned by theological dogma. This contributed to a greater tolerance for the development of secular ideology. It was a reaction against the monopoly of the Church over knowledge of the world. By the end of the 17th century, elementary education had become more widespread, imposing itself in the 20th century as the norm. Humankind realized that religions, dogmas, or worse, superstitions, were certainly not the way to a better life. The medieval atrocities of the Inquisition resonate more or less subconsciously in our minds to the present day. The failure of religion to furnish us with an intellectual understanding of life, the universe, and our existence as a whole became increasingly more than evident. We are not at the center of the universe. And yes, evolution is true. Religion may have prevented the collapse of human civilization by imposing some collective moral and ethical rules of conduct. However, blind faith, obedience to religious scriptures and authority, and theological discourse did not project humankind to a higher material well-being or more comprehensive understanding of reality. Worse, it did not even boost its spiritual status, something which it promised and was supposed to do. Science surpassed religious faith and elevated the discriminating skills of the mind to new heights as the supreme means of knowledge. Understanding the nature of reality and man's capacity to uncover it with reason has made it clear that science and reason are better tools in terms of capturing the workings of the material world than any scripture or authoritative clerical dogma. The mind is an intellectual mechanism that coordinates, organizes, observes, distinguishes, separates, and categorizes in accordance with a rational order. It naturally looks for the order in the world around it. And because the physical universe displays some order in forces and forms, naturally the mind didn't fail to find it. The analytic description of this order became synonymously known as knowledge. The old dream of Pythagoras of describing the reality of experience perceived through the senses and organized by the mind in the form of a mathematical language became an established and universally accepted form of communication and mutual understanding. The Renaissance period elevated mathematics to one of the most cherished and highest forms of knowledge. Accordingly, the restoration of interest in mathematics and empiric approaches led to a widespread emphasis on the study of the quantitative aspects of existence. Measurements and numbers became the ultimate tools and expressions for what we call nowadays objectivity. The systematic examination of matter by physical senses and its mental organization into a mathematical theory led to the overwhelming success of what is nowadays called Newtonian or Galilean physics, thus widening the schism induced by the division of science and theology. Secular humanism was born. The world was recognized as the exclusive territory for study by science, and knowledge was defined as that which could be proven only by procedures that were abstracted as far as possible from human experience. An analytic and mathematical conception of reality was elevated to a central position and inspired a mechanistic philosophy of the universe entirely justifiable in terms of logical and numerical principles. And the universe became a gigantic soulless clockwork with no meaning or aim. Indeed, the Darwinian revolution represented yet another backlash to any non-materialistic and teleological hypothesis. That is, ideas invoking and involving a purpose or an aim behind the evolutionary processes. In fact, teleology, not to be confused with theology, is a theory or an understanding of processes implying the existence of an aim, a purpose, goal, or finality in it. It seeks to explain phenomena in terms of design and purpose, and sees the causes by which they arise as the mean and function for that purpose, rather than originating more or less accidentally from a purely aimless and mechanical mechanism. In particular, natural teleology considers the possibility that natural processes are the extrinsic manifestation guided by final causes. The typical example of a naturalistic teleology is the belief that evolution is a goal-driven process, something which the present neo-Darwinian evolutionary theories deny. So modern science does not use teleological arguments. Quite the contrary, it makes its utmost to eliminate it. Therefore, the first humans, according to neo-Darwinian theory, did not appear on Earth because someone was playing around with dust. Instead, they were the result of evolution, as were other species. Later, we learned also that we had a common ancestor with the chimpanzees and gorillas. What a shock! Not only are we not at the center of the universe, but we are only one animal among many others. What seemed to be the final nail in the coffin came with the progress of the 20th century biological sciences, which apparently became able to describe all life in terms of purely biochemical reactions. The discovery of the DNA code, the structure of cells and their metabolic functions, the significant advances of biology and medicine, and the recent breakthroughs of neuroscience all pointed in one direction. Living organisms are biological machines. There is no need to invoke a ghostly life principle other than those dictated by matter and the laws of physics. The reduction of everything to matter seemed to be unstoppable. René Descartes, the well-known French philosopher and mathematician of the 17th century and founding father of modern science, conceived of a universe in terms of purely mechanical and physical laws. With the exception of the human soul and God, which are separate and having nothing to do with nature, everything that exists, including our bodies and brains, must be described using mechanical processes. All the world is a machine, and nature is only about material particles interacting with each other according to the laws of physics. Nevertheless, Descartes still conceived of the existence of some non-physical stuff. Inside the human body is a soul, in contrast to animals which he believed have no soul and are mere automatons, as he called them. And outside the universe there is a God. His mind-body dualism envisaged a res extensa and a res cogitans, an extended and a thinking substance, the latter being distinguished from our bodies and brains, and so-called immaterial mind. Francis Bacon, the English philosopher and contemporary of Descartes, also conceived of what we call in modern parlance experimentation or empiricism as the torture of nature. Nature must be put on the rack to reveal its secrets. This creepy analogy, by the way, was no coincidence. Bacon was also a statesman who actively advocated for the use of torture on humans in legal proceedings as a means for discovery and not for evidence, by the way. Descartes and Bacon's almost purely mechanistic and material conception of the world became the historical source and origin of modern physicalism. Physicalism is a form of ontological monism, that is, a view of reality that reduces everything to matter, the laws of physics, space and time. It is a more precise term than materialism, which seems to suggest only matter as the ultimate foundation of everything. In the literature, however, the two, that is, physicalism and materialism, the two are frequently used synonymously. And sometimes we will also do the same thing here. So physicalism, materialism, this conception that it's all about physics and matter. So physicalism goes even further by getting rid of the last non-physical remnants, reducing also all mental processes to material ones, and rejecting any metaphysical conceptions like a soul or a god, rejecting it as an unnecessary hypothesis. Thus, the success of the materialistic scientific inquiry into the mathematical order of a mechanical universe led to the belief that the mind and consciousness are just an epiphenomenon of the brain. There seemed to be no reason whatsoever to conjecture otherwise. Science has been so tremendously successful in explaining the workings of nature that there was no reason to invoke non-material substances or whatever kind of ghosts to explain the mind and consciousness. Strangely enough, not only is this still a stumbling block for materialism, but science did not make an inch of progress in 4 centuries after Descartes' speculations. Consciousness, the mind, and our subjective experience appear to have something irreducible. However, it is only a matter of time, so goes the belief, that science will explain that as well. We shouldn't unnecessarily multiply entities to explain the observed universe every time there is a mystery that science still can't solve. There is no reason to conjecture that the mind and consciousness are nothing but mechanical processes dominated by mathematical laws. This way of thinking eliminates the dualism between mind and matter and wants to reduce consciousness and all of life to biochemical reactions. Our experiences of pain and pleasure, hate and love, joy and grief are only an emergent epiphenomenal manifestation of the biochemistry of the gray matter in our skull. We would like to believe otherwise, but let's face it, we are just biorobots. That's what physicalism substantially states, and physicalism became the new paradigm. This world and life conception were further strengthened in the collective consciousness by the practical application of science. From the Industrial Revolution, with its steam engines and telegraphs first, to the modern digital revolution with its computers, the internet, smartphones, and so on, the power and efficacy of the materialistic sciences. These things stand in its full glory and splendor in front of us all. Technology, the utilitarian and pragmatic outcome of the theoretical aspects of science, dominate nowadays our lives, not only materially but also financially. However, having said that, we submit that we must look further. Describing the undeniable success of materialism and reason furnishes us with a still too superficial understanding of what was and still is going on. We must expand our vision and encompass the history of science and the application of thought and reason as a dynamic whole, recognizing its less obvious but equally important function. We should look retrospectively and see what the role and function of science and reason as a whole were in the evolutionary history of humankind. Had we not disengaged from the obscure and primitive forms of beliefs and religious dogma, separating the objects of study from the ideas and beliefs of the subject, reason wouldn't have had the opportunity to develop as it did. The intellectual faculties of the species, of us humans, were greatly favored by the concentration of its cognitive skills into a rational enterprise that science demands. Without the so-called Age of Enlightenment, also called the Age of Reason, almost all of humanity would have remained stuck in a state of development that didn't go much further than blind religious beliefs and medieval superstitions, or at best would have been forever satisfied with some glimmerings of the ancient Greek philosophers. This is the greatest service that science has provided to humanity. It has allowed us to exercise and further enhance our mental cognitive function. Science, with its theories and discoveries, not only delivered to us an incredible amount of knowledge about the world and ourselves, and not only allowed for an enormous increase in material wealth, but also, and I would say first and foremost, established the mind in the collective. Rational, analytic and logical thinking might not be something that is equally distributed throughout the population. Still, as compared to the Middle Ages, on average, it has become a more widespread common good. The mind has rooted itself in the human race much more deeply than what it was when Copernicus dared to conjecture that we are not at the center of the universe. Therefore, firstly, we contend that science and reason are means by which nature advances an evolutionary purpose. Secondly, we should not forget how every stage of the progression is never the final one, but is always the preparation of the next evolutionary leap. Mind, reason, the physicalist temptation to reduce everything to matter, and physical laws were all preparatory exercises to foster the skills of an infant humanity. However, once they hit their limits or are even exhausted, they must be recognized for what they are. The human intellect must inevitably be only a transitional cognitive function, not the last rung of the ladder. Physicalism has its truth and value, and was necessary, a necessary starting point that provided a firm basis upon which a still not fully developed mind had to start. Although mind, science, its philosophies, methodologies are only transitional philosophy methodology that served a purpose, it is not the final frontier of knowledge. And that's where we encounter the resistance to change. As is so typical of the mind itself, once it finds the solution to a problem or makes a new discovery, it has an innate tendency to universalize it to everything it knows, rendering it as a fixed and eternal law once and forever. Because the mind was able to develop the scientific method, empiricism, data analysis, and a mathematical description to explain appearances, though only to a limited extent, and dominate the material world, abstracting it from any religious myth and leading to such extraordinary material progresses for humankind, the very same mind now feels justified to enthrone itself as the ultimate and absolute ruler and tool of knowledge. However, the answers to the fundamental questions about the source and essence of things like matter, life, and mind remain hidden. Quantum physics defies any classical concept of reality bound to mental concepts of local realism and determinism. The complexity of life, be it physical or biological, let alone social and psychological, increasingly looks beyond our rational and intellectual capacity for scientific systematization. The appearance of that immaterial thing like consciousness in an apparently inert material and unconscious universe remains a mystery more than ever. The faith that someday new ideas concerning discoveries in molecular biology, the origin of the universe, or a unified field theory where matter is the sole and ultimate ontological primitive may solve these mysteries is becoming less and less convincing. We must seriously consider whether the failure to find adequate answers to these fundamental questions is not only a matter of time and scientific progress, but may be also an unavoidable result of the intrinsic limitations in the conception and methodology of the scientific quest itself, This is scientific quest for knowledge, and that is unwilling to go beyond a strictly physicalist approach. The mind has done a pretty good job of charting the territory, but has not told us much about the territory itself. After science's rapid expansion, it has become increasingly clear that the old belief in science and reason as the solution to everything is an illusion. Science alone can't explain everything about material reality. Additionally, reason and technological progress alone aren't the magic wand that will fix every material problem humanity is facing. The original hope of the fathers of the Age of Enlightenment, that reason is the ultimate tool that will explain everything and elevate humanity's condition to a higher status of existence, has been quite convincing for a long period, but it is now crumbling and coming to an end. It is true that at least from the material point of view, humanity has undoubtedly made notable progress compared to the Middle Ages. Though one might argue that this is true only for some nations and social classes, while others are still struggling with poverty and material underdevelopment. But anyhow, this view that reason will fix everything dominated the 18th and 19th centuries and was somewhat weakened by the destruction of 2 world wars in the 20th century, but still dominates our thinking and beliefs today. One has only to observe how much we invest in research and technologies that adopt a strictly physicalist and reductionist paradigm, and that is supposed to lead us towards a bright future. We are told that it is only a matter of time before genetic medicine can eradicate genetic diseases, before neurobiology heals Parkinson's or Alzheimer's diseases, before stem cells regrow organs, before genomic wins the war against cancer, and before artificial intelligence frees us from stressful work, allowing us to nap in a self-driving car that will drive us autonomously and safely to our destinations. And in the event that this human race would be so dumb as to destroy itself, using the very same science and reason itself, for example with weapons of mass destruction in a Third World War, or annihilate its own self-sustainment, destroying the ecological environment, science will again be the magic solution to this again, because let us send then humans to Mars and terraform the red planet. In the case of extinction on one planet, the other will be the spare tire and save humanity. Therefore, in this vision, only science, technology, and the application of the intellect, of mind, reason, the analytic mind, are the solutions. What else could there possibly be? But even if all that will become a reality, and as we will argue, there are good reasons to think that these techno-scientific marvels will become reality only very partially, the question remains: will this fill the sense of void, emptiness, and lack of meaning that, despite all these material advances, is growing, especially in young generations? We gradually realize that the current framework of materialistic and strictly analytic science cannot resolve both practical and social issues, and several conceptual problems of a more philosophical nature remain. This scientism did not lead to a happier existence for the human race, and did not make us less savage and more wiser. At the end of the day, it is even making perhaps somewhat dumber. If science remains a purely materialistic search for knowledge, it will hamper the evolutionary process of humankind. If physicalism does not take its place as a complement to science rather than all of science, nature may throw us back to the days of alchemy and magic. If reason does not open itself to something that transcends it, the mind might regress to irrationality and superstitions. We will have to recognize the signs of the times. Otherwise, we will have to go through new dark ages and learn the lesson all over again. It is time to look forward and go beyond our intellectual childhood. Of course, not by returning to some nostalgic past, but by recognizing the limits of the present paradigm, which posits its foundations on matter and logic alone. The age of pure reason, in which the intellect is the sole ruler and arbiter, is coming to an end. But this is not a call to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Reason, rational thinking, empiricism, the scientific method, and technology will continue to play a central role and offer new solutions to old problems. The mind and its material transforming power will continue to be a central dynamic force. But it will have to be kept inside the dominion of expertise and competence of its own, without invading territories that it can't understand, not even in principle. What we need now is a more profound and integrated synthesis of knowledge by recognizing the spiritual component of life, mind, consciousness, and nature. Science, reason, and the rational physicalism that followed from the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment served an evolutionary purpose. However, precisely for this reason, they must be considered transitional. The desire to fix them, science, reason, rationalism, the analytic mind, to fix them once and forever as the ultimate tools to achieve knowledge and truth in every domain, is ultimately, if you think about it, an anthropocentric ideology that stands in stark contrast to the very same evolutionary process that science itself always cherishes so much. Science is a species-specific mode of cognition. It is particular to our species, but it's not the ultimate thing that will appear in the evolutionary process. The mind is incredibly efficient in deceiving itself in a certain sense. We will see how the idea that it can impartially and objectively assess the inherent nature of the world around us, independent of its own mental projections, is perhaps its greatest self-deception. And yet, despite its shortcomings, the shortcomings of mind, there is a wonderful aspect of human reason that makes it extremely interesting and tremendously powerful. If it is honest and humble and does not tell itself fairy tales, it has the exquisite ability to become aware of its own limitations and to draw a clear demarcation line between what it can know and do and what it cannot. And even better, once it can clearly see these boundaries, the mind can be the decisive tool with which it can transcend itself by exponentially accelerating an evolutionary process that otherwise would take ages. That is precisely the path that we will follow here.